Welcome to The Last Hike. Today I'll be going over a retired couple from Norway who had decades of experience outdoors in severe cold, but almost none in extreme desert heat. Used to some of the harshest winters on Earth, they set out on a hike in Death Valley, entering an environment with dangers very different from those they knew back home. And what happened next would expose a danger they had never encountered before. It was July 15th, 2021. During a period of extreme heat sweeping across the American Southwest, near the Golden Canyon Trail in Death Valley National Park, California. The region was experiencing dangerously high summer temperatures, with Death Valley facing some of the most severe heat conditions of the year. Mathis Castagne was 55 years old, a retired maritime equipment technician from Tromsø, Norway, a coastal city way up above the Arctic Circle. For more than 30 years, he had worked around fishing vessels and offshore support ships, fixing and maintaining equipment in some pretty demanding environments along Norway's northern coastline. And that kind of work wasn't easy. It required a lot of patience, paying attention to small details, and staying calm when things suddenly went wrong. After spending decades at sea, Mathis had learned to respect the environment around him. You watched the weather, you prepared for bad conditions, and you understood that even a small mistake could become a serious problem when you were far away from help. This is the part that gets me. Mathis had spent decades working in demanding environments, but experience in one extreme does not always prepare someone for another. Outside of work, Mathis was still someone who loved being outdoors. Growing up and living in northern Norway, outdoor activities were just part of everyday life. Hiking through the mountains, walking through unpredictable weather, dealing with long winters, those were things he had done for years. To the people who knew him, Mathis was someone who regularly spent time outdoors and was familiar with harsh conditions. His wife, Ingrid Castagne, was 51 years old and a semi-retired school teacher. She had spent most of her career teaching primary school students in and around their hometown. And from what people close to her said, Ingrid was the kind of person who was patient, organized, and thoughtful. She was someone who noticed the little things, someone who liked to plan ahead, and honestly, someone described as patient, organized, and thoughtful. Together, Mathis and Ingrid stayed active well into their 50s. They regularly hiked in the mountains near their home, went cross-country skiing during the winter, and kept the kind of steady fitness that came from a lifetime of living in a harsh climate. There was no known sign that either of them had health problems that would have made hiking difficult. Neither smoked. Their family said neither had previously encountered serious trouble during a short recreational hike. But there was one big difference. The kind of extreme weather they understood was cold. That was what they knew. They were familiar with the risks associated with cold environments, including freezing temperatures, snow, and winter exposure. But Death Valley was a completely different kind of danger. The dry heat, the lack of shade, the way the ground itself could become dangerously hot, those were conditions they had never really experienced before. There was no indication that either of them had previous experience hiking in a desert climate. They had limited experience with how quickly dehydration and heat illness can develop in extreme desert conditions. The trip itself had actually been something they had been planning for more than a year. After travel restrictions changed and international tourism gradually resumed, Mathis and Ingrid finally made their long-awaited trip to the American Southwest. Mathis and Ingrid had wanted to visit the American Southwest for a long time. Messages shared before the trip showed excitement about visiting the American Southwest and experiencing a landscape very different from the one they knew back home. They weren't inexperienced outdoors or careless about preparation. They had spent decades learning how to respect difficult environments. But sometimes the hardest places to prepare for are the ones that don't even look dangerous at first. Coming from Tromsø, where snow, freezing temperatures, and long winters were part of everyday life, Death Valley represented almost the complete opposite environment. This was not a record attempt or extreme expedition. It was simply a recreational visit to experience a landscape unlike anything they knew back home. They had spent much of their lives outdoors in harsh northern conditions, but those experiences came from an environment with very different risks: snow, ice, freezing temperatures, and winter exposure rather than extreme heat and dehydration. Unlike cold weather environments, where danger can often be visible through snow, ice, or changing weather, extreme heat can develop without obvious visual warning. What stands out to me is that they weren't chasing some extreme challenge. They were just trying to experience a place completely different from home. And that's what makes this so tragic. Their messages reflected excitement about experiencing a landscape very different from their home environment. Their messages focused on the scenery and novelty of the trip and did not mention concerns about the extreme heat. The available evidence provides no indication that they changed their plans because of heat concerns before beginning the hike, but Death Valley's summer environment is unlike most places on Earth. Located in California's Mojave Desert, the park is a vast landscape of exposed rock, dry valleys, and open terrain with little natural shade. During the hottest months, temperatures in some lower elevation areas can climb beyond 120 degrees Fahrenheit. Under these conditions, the body can lose fluids rapidly, and the warning signs of dehydration can become difficult to recognize. The park's dry air adds another danger. Sweat evaporates quickly, meaning visitors may not realize how much water their bodies are losing. Combined with direct sunlight, physical exertion, and limited shade, heat exhaustion can progress into heat stroke far faster than many first-time desert visitors expect. For me, that's the unsettling part about Death Valley. It's not a place that looks threatening at first. It's beautiful, quiet, and easy to underestimate, which is exactly what makes it so dangerous. Park officials routinely warn summer visitors that even front-country trails in Death Valley can become dangerous during extreme heat. Routes around Golden Canyon may have limited shade, unreliable cell coverage, and little immediate assistance once visitors move away from the parking area. For experienced desert hikers, these risks are familiar. For visitors seeing Death Valley for the first time, the landscape can be misleading, beautiful, quiet, and seemingly easy to explore, while hiding conditions that can become deadly within a matter of hours. The Costanges arrived at the Golden Canyon Trailhead parking area during the late morning hours, a start time considerably later than the early morning departure that park rangers typically recommend for summer hiking. Activity. By the time they arrived, temperatures in the lower elevations of Death Valley were already climbing above 100 degrees Fahrenheit. Weather stations in the region recorded extreme heat during this period, particularly in the park's lower desert areas. However, conditions can vary significantly throughout Death Valley depending on elevation, terrain, and location, meaning temperatures at the trail itself may have been different from nearby weather stations. What makes this dangerous is that the skills that helped them survive northern winters were not necessarily the same skills needed to survive a desert summer. Their rental vehicle, a mid-size sedan typical of tourist rentals in the region, was later found parked in the designated Golden Canyon parking area, positioned in a manner consistent with a routine visitor stop rather than any indication of trouble. Investigators who later examined the vehicle found sunscreen, a park brochure, and a partially consumed bottle of water inside items consistent with a typical daytime outing rather than preparation for a longer or more demanding desert hike. They appeared to be carrying only a limited amount of water for a summer hike in Death Valley. Photographs recovered from their personal devices showed Mathis and Ingrid dressed in light-colored, short-sleeved shirts, shorts, athletic walking shoes, and wide-brimmed sun hats clothing suitable for a casual warm-weather outing, but without some of the additional protection often recommended for extreme desert conditions, such as long, loose-fitting clothing, cooling equipment, or electrolyte supplies. Personal items left in the vehicle, including water and hiking materials, were consistent with a shorter recreational visit rather than preparation for a longer desert excursion. The Costanges parked at the Golden Canyon Trailhead and began along the Golden Canyon Gower Gulch Loop, a route that starts as an accessible scenic hike before moving into more exposed desert terrain. The first sections of the trail are popular with visitors because of the colorful canyon walls and dramatic rock formations, but farther sections offer less shade and fewer opportunities for quick access back to the parking area. During extreme summer heat, even a route considered manageable during cooler months can become dangerous. The early part of the hike appeared normal. Golden Canyon is a popular visitor area, and photographs recovered from the couple's devices showed Mathis and Ingrid moving through the landscape like other tourists exploring Death Valley for the first time. The images showed them stopping to take pictures, looking around at the scenery, and continuing along the route. At that stage, there were no obvious signs in the photographs that they were already experiencing a serious emergency. In those early photos, there was nothing visible that suggested the couple was already in immediate danger. Mathis and Ingrid appeared upright and engaged with their surroundings, but photographs could only capture a brief moment in time. They could not show changes happening between images, such as increasing dehydration, rising body temperature, or the gradual effects of prolonged heat exposure. Looking at these photos myself, they just look like any couple on vacation, smiling, taking pictures, and that's honestly what makes this so hard to look at. At this stage, there was no visible evidence that the hike had become an emergency. The vast open valleys, unusual rock formations, and silence of the desert made Golden Canyon a destination that attracts visitors looking to experience a landscape very different from northern climates. Based on the distance they ultimately traveled and the locations where they were later discovered, investigators believe the couple continued farther along the Golden Canyon route beyond the sections most visitors typically explore. During this portion of the hike, there was still no clear evidence that an emergency had begun. The available evidence suggests that, at least initially, they were simply continuing to explore an environment that appeared safe and manageable. The problem was that the conditions of Death Valley do not always reveal their danger immediately. The Golden Canyon Trail could feel manageable during the first portion of the walk, while the combination of increasing distance, rising temperatures, and exposed terrain slowly reduced the margin for error. By the time the environment began showing its true severity, the couple was already farther from safety than when they first started. That's what makes heat so dangerous. There's no visible warning like a storm or a cliff edge. It just gets worse beneath a clear sky. However, as they moved farther away from the more sheltered sections of Golden Canyon and into exposed desert terrain, things around them started to change. The shade they had found earlier became harder to come by, and longer stretches of the hike left them standing directly under the sun. With every step, they were also getting farther away from the trailhead. The landscape that brought many visitors to Golden Canyon, the narrow canyon walls, colorful rock formations, and desert views, was becoming a much harder environment to navigate. In a cooler place, adding a few extra miles to a hike might just mean you get tired and it takes longer to finish. But in extreme desert heat, every extra mile matters. The body keeps losing water, the heat keeps building, and there are fewer chances to stop, recover, and cool down, especially when water is limited. Earlier in the hike, the available evidence suggested that the couple was still moving through the area normally. Photos from their devices showed them stopping to take pictures, looking at the scenery, and continuing along the route. At that stage, there were no obvious signs that the conditions had already become dangerous. But the farther they went, the less forgiving the environment became. There were fewer places to rest. The afternoon heat was continuing to rise, and because they had already walked so far in, turning back didn't mean they were immediately safe. It meant they still had to cover the same distance again, this time while dealing with the full effects of the heat. And that's the part I keep coming back to. By the time you realize you should turn around, you're already stuck paying for the distance you already walked. The following sequence is a possible reconstruction based on the available evidence and known effects of extreme heat exposure. The exact timing of their symptoms and decisions cannot be confirmed. Investigators believe the couple may not have immediately recognized how quickly the situation was changing. The most dangerous part of situations like this is that the turning point is rarely obvious. There is usually no single moment when someone realizes the situation has become dangerous. Instead, things can change gradually. One missed warning sign, one extra mile, one more decision to continue. Heat-related illness often does not begin with an obvious warning that something is seriously wrong. Instead, the first symptoms can appear similar to ordinary exhaustion needing more frequent breaks, feeling unusually tired, slowing down, becoming increasingly thirsty, or struggling to maintain the same pace. For visitors who are physically active and accustomed to outdoor activities, these early signs can be easy to dismiss as the normal discomfort of a long walk, rather than the beginning of a dangerous medical emergency. As heat illness progresses, the danger is not always the feeling of being overheated. Many victims experience increasing weakness, dizziness, confusion, or changes in behavior before a complete collapse occurs. These symptoms can make it harder to recognize the severity of the situation, because the same condition affecting the body is also beginning to affect the person's ability to judge what is happening. The environment itself also made those warning signs more difficult to judge. Death Valley's dry air allows sweat to evaporate quickly, which can create the impression that the body is coping better than it actually is. A person may not feel as overheated or drenched in sweat as they would in a humid climate, even while losing significant amounts of fluid. Combined with direct sunlight, reflected heat from the surrounding rock, and continued physical movement, dehydration can progress faster than many first-time desert visitors expect. Honestly, the dry sweat thing gets me every time. Your body is telling you a lie. You feel fine right up until you really aren't. As the afternoon went on and the temperature climbed toward its highest point, Mathis and Ingrid were now much farther from their vehicle. They had limited water with them, and they were moving through an area where there was very little protection from the sun. The landscape that had appeared manageable earlier in the day had become increasingly challenging, challenging, as distance, heat exposure, and limited water reduced their options. Every extra step took more energy, and there were fewer chances to stop, rest, and recover. At this point, the trail ahead wasn't just an extension of their sightseeing walk anymore. It meant spending even more time out in conditions that were already starting to take a toll on their bodies. The evidence suggests that their condition likely deteriorated gradually rather than through a single sudden event. Investigators believe their pace may have slowed as heat exposure accumulated, with longer pauses between movements and increasing difficulty maintaining the same speed they had earlier in the hike. By this stage, the couple was no longer dealing with ordinary fatigue from walking. They were facing an environment where the ability to recognize danger, make decisions, and return safely could all be affected by the very heat they were trying to escape. By this stage, their original plan to complete a short scenic hike had likely changed. What began as a simple sightseeing walk through one of the most unusual landscapes in North America had become a situation where every decision carried greater consequences. The distance they had already traveled became a major factor. By this stage, any attempt to return would have required covering the same exposed route while dealing with the effects of prolonged heat exposure. Continuing forward offered the possibility of reaching another point of interest or a shorter route back, but it also meant spending even more time away from shade, water, and assistance. I genuinely don't think there was a good option left for them at this point. Both directions meant more sun, more distance, more damage. Investigators believe the couple likely reached this point gradually rather than through a single sudden emergency. In extreme heat, the body often begins to fail in stages. A person may first notice unusual tiredness, increased thirst, slower movement, or the need to stop more frequently. Those symptoms can appear manageable at first, especially for people who are physically active and accustomed to pushing through discomfort. But in extreme desert heat, the body has far less ability to recover, especially during prolonged exposure under direct sunlight. Every additional period spent walking under direct sunlight increases dehydration, raises core temperature, and reduces physical endurance. As their condition got worse, even simple decisions that would normally feel obvious during a hike could start becoming much harder. When heat illness begins to take over, it doesn't just affect the body, it can also affect the mind. A person might not fully realize how serious things have become. Heat illness can affect judgment and decision-making. In some cases, people experiencing heat-related confusion may underestimate the seriousness of their condition, misjudge distances, or continue moving despite needing medical attention. And that's what makes it so dangerous. By the time confusion sets in, someone may not even be able to recognize that they're in real danger. Heat stroke is especially dangerous because it can take away the very thing a person needs most in that moment: the ability to make clear decisions and protect themselves. This is what I find so cruel about heat stroke. The exact thing you need to save yourself, clear judgment, is the first thing it takes from you. The evidence suggests that by the later stages of the afternoon, the couple was no longer simply exploring the landscape. Their final location suggests that they had moved beyond the most frequently visited sections of Golden Canyon and into more exposed terrain where shade and assistance were limited. The route ahead offered fewer opportunities for shade. The vehicle was still a significant distance away, and the extreme heat continued to reduce their ability to recover. Because no one witnessed the couple's final hours, investigators cannot know the exact sequence of events, conversations, or decisions that occurred after they moved deeper into Golden Canyon. The timeline that follows is a reconstruction based on available evidence, including photographs, personal belongings, environmental conditions, search findings, and the locations where both individuals were eventually found. It explains what may have happened, but the exact details of their final movements cannot be confirmed. At some point during the later stages of the hike, Mathis and Ingrid were no longer together. Investigators could not determine exactly when the separation occurred or what caused it. Based on their final locations, investigators considered several possibilities, including that one of them may have become unable to continue at the same pace, while the other continued moving. Another possibility is that advancing heat-related confusion affected their ability to communicate clearly, stay on the same route, or make coordinated decisions. I have to be honest, the idea of them getting separated out there is the hardest part of this whole story for me. In many emergency situations, people often try to stay together and help each other. However, extreme heat can affect how people think and respond. As heat illness worsens and develops into heat stroke, it can lead to confusion, disorientation, and impaired decision-making. Investigators could not determine why Mathis was ultimately found in a different location from Ingrid or what occurred during those final moments. One possibility is that advancing heat illness affected his judgment, navigation, or ability to assess the situation clearly. However, without a witness or direct record of his actions, his intentions cannot be known with certainty. I don't think the evidence is enough to say that Mathis intentionally abandoned her. One possible explanation is that heat-related confusion affected his judgment, but the exact reason for his movements will never be known. Their final locations show that they ended up in different areas of the same desert environment. Ingrid was found near a rocky section that provided limited protection from direct sunlight, while Mathis was discovered approximately a quarter-mile away from Ingrid and farther from the established route. These locations helped investigators understand the possible sequence of events, but they could not determine the exact decisions or movements that led them there. The remaining timeline was reconstructed using the evidence left behind, including personal belongings, disturbed terrain, and the locations where both individuals were ultimately found. Although Golden Canyon is a popular area, visitor traffic can vary throughout the day, and extreme summer temperatures can reduce the number of people hiking during peak afternoon hours. During extreme summer conditions, many visitors who arrive at Golden Canyon do so early in the morning or remain close to the first viewpoints near the trailhead. As temperatures rise, fewer people continue deeper into exposed sections of the route. This meant that while the area was accessible and visited by tourists, sections farther from the parking area could still have limited foot traffic during the hottest part of the day. The rental vehicle remained parked at the trailhead well beyond the time they would have been expected to return. When the couple failed to return and their vehicle remained at the trailhead, concern was raised and a search was initiated. Because the rental vehicle remained at the Golden Canyon parking area and the couple had not returned, search teams first focused on routes connected to that trailhead. Investigators used the vehicle location, photographs recovered from their phones, the park information found inside the vehicle, and the surrounding terrain to establish the most likely search area. Photographs and personal belongings provided clues about their movements, but they did not provide a complete timeline of their final hours. Any location information stored on the devices was either unavailable or insufficient to reconstruct their final movements. The search team eventually located both individuals in separate areas away from the main Golden Canyon route. Search efforts expanded using ground teams, aerial searches, and the evidence recovered from the couple's belongings. Ingrid was found near a rocky section that provided limited shade, while Mathis was discovered farther away. Investigators noted that advanced heat illness can cause confusion, impaired judgment, and difficulty navigating, which may have influenced their final locations. However, the exact decisions, movements, and circumstances that led them there remain unknown. Their locations provided clues about the possible sequence of events, but they could not reveal what either person was thinking or why they ended up in those specific places during their final moments. Emergency responders confirmed that both individuals had died. Later examinations determined that the deaths were consistent with fatal heat stroke caused by prolonged exposure to extreme temperatures, dehydration, and the body's inability to regulate its internal temperature. Based on the available evidence, several factors likely contributed to the outcome, including the extreme temperatures that day, limited water availability, the later than recommended start time, and the couple's lack of prior exposure to severe desert heat. Together, these conditions created an environment where a sightseeing hike that began on a familiar visitor route became a life-threatening situation after prolonged exposure to extreme heat, limited water, and increasing distance from assistance.